morning, good afternoon, YouTubers. I'm going to read Chapter 3 of the Spirit Flyer series, Book 1 of the Spirit Flyer series. The name of this book is The Magic Bicycle. And the series is basically it's about the New World Order and the evil that is inherent in the spiritual world, as well as many people who are greedy, selfish, low level type people. So chapter 1 was the bicycle that found a boy, and it tells how John left his bicycle and it got crushed by a car. So he went to the dump and found a bicycle, an ugly old big fat wheel single speed bicycle. Actually, it did have a gear shifting thing, but he didn't know what it was, so he took it off. And then chapter 2 is fixing the Spirit Flyer, where he takes some of the things out that he should have left on. Later he finds out about them: the light, the mirror, and the gear shift thing. Chapter 3 that I'm about to read is The Magic in the Bicycle. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. I didn't know quite how to set this up, so I think I'll just read it so you can see my voice. Yeah, here. My wife always say, let me put my glasses on so I can hear you better. Read lips, whatever. Anyway, I'll kind of hold like this. I could go like that, but that ain't gonna do much for you. I haven't looked for and have not found, because I haven't looked for it, an online version. And I didn't do that when I read Lights Out, because it just was too much of a pain in the butt, scrolling, and just, it was a nightmare, so I didn't do it. I just read right out of the book, is what I'm going to do tonight with this one. The Magic in the Bicycle, Chapter 3. John didn't ride the bike for 2 days, even though it was his own fault that he'd been careless and hadn't watched where he was going. He blamed the wreck on the bike. It's the bike's fault. Yeah. Like many people, he was slow to admit that he'd made a mistake. Every time he felt the pain in his leg or saw the scab on his hand, he felt a little surge of anger toward the Spirit Flyer. He was sorry he had spent his money for the tires, money he could have saved to buy a good new bike. On Thursday after school, Susan asked John if she could have the bike, since he wasn't riding it. John told her he might sell it since he had spent money for the tires. Susan asked how much money he wanted. John was tempted to name a price, but the fact that Susan wanted the bike made him think again. He wasn't sure he really wanted to get rid of the Spirit Flyer. Even if he sold it, he wouldn't have enough money for a new bike, or even a good used one. He still wanted to enter the race and safety contest. By now, John realized that it wasn't the bike's fault that he had crashed, but his own. After Susan offered to buy the bike, John went into the garage for another look. The Spirit Flyer was leaning against the wall where he'd left it, the loose spoke dangling from the back wheel. John stared at the bike for a long time, then quietly got a pair of pliers and began fixing the spoke. Without anyone to hear him, John spoke 2 words to the old bike. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. John put the pliers away, then hopped on the bike. He pedaled down the alleys and back streets, trying to avoid his friends. He pedaled up the Crofts Road, then began going faster. He worked up to cruising speed slowly because both his legs still hurt from his accidents. But once he really got going, the bike whizzed down the road at tremendous speed. John realized he still might have a chance for the race if he practiced enough. The 10-speed bicycles had a big advantage in getting off to a quicker start than the old single-speed Spirit Flyer. He knew he would have to make up for this handicap somehow if he was going to win the race. John pedaled down Crofts Road until he came to the dump road. Since there were still 2 hours until supper, he decided to ride on toward the dump. That way he could practice in total privacy. He pedaled across the ancient wooden bridge over the Sleepy Eye River. After the bridge, the dirt road to the dump began. John rode to the edge of the road to avoid the long ruts and the large holes. He didn't want another accident. He was already worried that his legs might still be sore by the time of the bike race 3 weeks away. Even though John was determined to be careful and avoid all the bumps, he couldn't help but look, but when off to his right, he saw what looked like a deer. Instead of stopping the bike, he only slowed down while he was searching for the animal. Just when he saw the beautiful doe and fawn, it happened. The bike had slowly swerved toward the center of the road, straight into a deep rut. When John felt the tire going down, he jerked the handlebars, trying to avoid falling into the rut, but it was too late. The tire hit bottom hard, so hard it jarred his teeth. But a strange thing happened at that moment. When the bike started down into the hole, it threw John forward over the front of the handlebars. John held on as hard as he could, which saved him from another bad accident. But because he had forgotten to tighten the handlebars the day before he fixed the bike, they bent down under his weight. In fact, the handlebars bent down so far, John almost bumped his chin when he lost his balance. At the same time the bike hit the end of the rut, the front tire jumped into the air as if the bike were being shot off a small ramp. John knew he was bound to crash when the bike came back down because he was already hanging over the handlebars. But the front tire didn't come back down. It kept going up into the air, 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet off the ground. And not only that, the back tire came out of the rut and left the ground also. The old red bike seemed to be shooting straight up into the sky. John jerked back in fear, screaming and pulling on the handlebars, trying to stop. He pulled so hard that the loose handlebars came back up, this time too high. At that instant, the bike dipped back down toward the ground. The front tire gently landed on the old dirt road, followed by the rear tire. John pushed the handlebars back down so they were level and pushed down hard on the brake. The bike stopped. He hopped off and put the kickstand down. As he stood there trying to catch his breath, he stared at the old red bicycle, wondering what had happened. He wasn't surprised that the wheel had left the ground when it hit the end of the rut. That was normal. He and Roger had jumped their bikes off ramps in the past lots of times. But this had been different. The front tire had been 3 or more feet off the ground and showed no signs of coming down when he jerked the handlebars up. And the back tire had been almost as far off the ground. Even at his fastest speed, his old bicycle had never gone anywhere near that high off the ground, or for such a long distance. John ran back to the rut. He could see his tire tracks swerve into the rut and his wobbly tires tracks inside the rut. But when the tracks ended and didn't start again for 20 feet. John whistled. Even at his fastest, he'd never traveled farther than 5 or 6 feet. But he hadn't even been going fast when he came out of that rut. John looked at the old red bicycle leaning on its kickstand. He tried to remember exactly what happened. After thinking things over for several minutes, he knocked the kickstand up and got back onto the curious old bicycle. He pedaled past a series of bumps in the road, looking for a smooth stretch. Finally, he came to a place free of holes and ruts. John slowed down, gulped, then carefully pushed down on the handlebars. They didn't move. He pushed harder until the handlebars began to bend. At the moment they started to bend, the front wheel lifted off the ground. John watched the wheel rise higher and higher, 1 foot, then 2 feet off the ground. John was afraid to look back at the rear tire, but he felt it leave the road also. When the Spirit Flyer's front tire was about waist high off the ground, John became scared that he would fall off the old red bike. But he didn't panic. Instead, he pulled the handlebars up until they pointed down. The moment they pointed down, the bicycle began going down. The front tire touched the ground softly, followed by the rear tire. John leveled the handlebars and stopped. He was breathing hard with excitement, but he told himself not to be careless. He began pedaling the old red bicycle again. He immediately pushed the loose handlebars down. The front tire went up into the air just as before. John glanced back just in time to see the rear wheel leave the ground too. This time he waited until the bicycle was head high off the ground before pulling up on the handlebars. But instead of pulling the handlebars all the way up, he only pulled them up until they were level, as they should be normally. The front tire stopped rising this instant John pulled the handlebars level. But by this time, the Spirit Flyer didn't dip back to the ground. Instead, it flew through the air level with the road about 5 feet off the ground. He pedaled slowly, waiting to see if the bike would drop. As long as the handlebars were straight, the old red bike traveled through the air at the same height. John flew above the old dump road for almost 100 yards, then pulled the handlebars up. Instantly, the Spirit Flyer began to descend. The bike landed and John braked to a stop. John stared far down the road to make sure there were no low-hanging tree limbs, then started pedaling. He pushed down on the handlebars and the bike took off into the air, but this time John let the Spirit Flyer climb until it was high as the roof of his house before pulling the handlebars level. The old red bike traveled along high off the ground. John began to pedal faster and the Spirit Flyer jumped forward. When he saw the low-hanging tree limbs, he pulled the handlebars up. As expected, the bike went down, and landed on the dirt road. John didn't stop this time, but kept pedaling until he passed the trees. When his path was clear, he pointed the handlebars up, and the old red bike took off. If he hadn't been so excited, he would have seen a long black snake lying in the road just where the wheels of the old red bike had left the ground. John smelled a terrible odor of something dead, but he didn't think about it. The black snake rose up into the air, its red eyes staring at the flying bicycle and boy. The white circled X on the snake's throat spread out as the snake hissed, its red tongue flicking into the air. John let the spirit flyer rise until it was above the trees before leveling off. Once he could look down on the top of the tallest tree, the boy began to pedal faster. The speed of the old red bike increased more than he expected. The bike whizzed through the air, slightly humming as the wind sped by. Seeing a flat cow pasture off to his left, John decided to try another experiment. He turned the bike to the left, and the bike flew out over the pasture. John turned to the right, and the bike flew to the right. High above the sky, above the pasture, John traveled in a large circle. Riding the spirit flyer seemed to be the same as riding a regular bicycle, only it was much smoother as it glided through the air. But not only could it fly, it took less effort to go fast. John didn't have to pedal hard to reach the fastest speed he could go on the ground. And when he pedaled even faster, because it was so easy to pedal in the air, the bike went as fast as a motorcycle or car. John hadn't even begun to go as fast as he could pedal before he became scared and decided to slow down. He stepped back on the brake and the bike slowed to a normal bike speed. Using the brake made John wonder if he would fall out of the sky if he completely stopped the bike. He knew that on the ground it was almost impossible to keep a bike balanced if it wasn't moving. To test this out, John flew back until he saw a flat place in the cow pasture. He pointed the spirit flyer down and slowly approached the ground. When he was only about 1 foot above the grassy pasture, he leveled off and stepped on the brake until the bike slowed to an absolute stop, and then lowered slowly to the ground. John noticed it didn't have any trouble keeping his balance as the bike descended. Once he landed, he began pedaling and pointed the bike up. As before, the bike leveled off a foot above the pasture. When he braked, the bike slowed to a stop, then began dropping. But this time he took his foot off the brake. The bike stopped moving and stood in the air, perfectly still, 6 inches above the ground. The most amazing thing to John was that he had no trouble keeping the balance. That was the same as sitting in a chair. He sat for a minute, hanging above the ground, then pressed on the brake. The bike slowly dropped until it softly landed. John took the bike up again, leveling off at about tree height. He hit the brake and the bicycle stopped as before, then slowly started dropping toward the ground. John took his foot off the brake, and as before, the bike hung motionless in the air, 20 feet above the cow pasture. The boy sat high in the sky, feeling like a king with the world beneath him. John whooped with joy and began pedaling, guiding the spirit flyer up above the trees. He went so high that even the trees seemed tiny below him. The old dump road looked like a tiny brown ribbon until he reached the tiny bridge. Beyond the bridge, John could see Crofts Road, running into Centerville. The town looked like the tiny toy town that surrounded the electric train set that Roger kept in his basement. John could see cars moving in the streets. He could even pick out the roof of his house as he pedaled closer. But John didn't pedal too close to the town. At first he wanted to fly straight to his house, circle above the roof, and yell until his aunt and uncle came outside and saw him. Then he would land magnificently in the backyard. But as he pedaled closer to the town, he got a strong feeling that he should wait, that it might not be a good idea to go flying over Centerville like a boy on a rocket. John circled back toward the dump, deciding to keep the magic of the spirit flyer a secret, at least for a while. John practiced flying, losing all track of time. Suddenly he noticed it was darker. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and far off, approaching the town, he saw massive, angry, dark clouds, rain clouds. John sped through the air, dropping lower and lower until he was only 3 feet off the ground. By the time he reached the bridge over the Sleepy Eye River, he landed on the bridge, then rode the spirit flyer like a regular bicycle down Crofts Road. He could barely keep himself from taking the old red bike up into the air again, but something told him not to fly. He pedaled at his top ground speed all the way into town. The sky was black with clouds by the time he reached his house, and he parked the spirit flyer in the garage, making sure it was out of the way. Then he went inside. As soon as he opened the door, he smelled supper. For a moment, he hoped he wasn't too late, but his hopes faded as he walked into the living room and saw Susan clearing away the dishes. Uncle Bill looked at him sternly. "You're an hour late, John. Where have you been?" "Riding the spirit flyer," John said. "I'm sorry I'm late." "Sorry's not enough," John said. "You know the rules." "What's the rule for late supper?" "Stay in the yard for a week," John said. "But can't we make an exception? I mean, I didn't mean to be late. I was just..." "Rules are rules," Uncle Bill said. "If you start breaking all the house rules, wanting exceptions, what do I say to my girls?" Is it fair for you to break the rules and not them? No, sir, John said. If you start breaking all the rules, your life will be one big shambles and you will never accomplish anything. Yes, sir, John said. He knew there was no use in arguing, but knowing he would have to stay in the yard all week right after discovering the Spirit Flyer's secret was almost more than he could bear. How does that old bike work? Uncle Bill asked. Okay, John said without enthusiasm, it really flies. If he had looked up, John would have seen that nervous glance that passed between his aunt and uncle, but John could only think how much of a prison the house would be for a whole week. He looked down at his clean plate on the table. Rules, 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 he thought. Rules for supper, rules for keeping the bedroom clean, rules for work, rules for play. Why does my uncle have to have so many rules, rules, rules? Outside the sky was dark. Suddenly the lightning split the sky in an angry flash. A low rumble of thunder followed. Rain began hitting the roof. Turn the page. Turn the page. Boy, it's a long chapter, right? Maybe that was the end of it. I don't know. Come on. Kind of hard to... Okay. That was the end of the chapter. Okay, that was the end of the chapter. Sorry. All that time just to find out that was the end of the chapter. Okay, so that's it. That was chapter 3, Magic Bicycle, by John Bibby. 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 Bibbee. Sorry about that. You can buy them on eBay, Amazon, whatever, if you want to read them to your children. I'd really suggest that if you have younger children. These are, I'm saying, grade school, probably 10 to 12, 13 years old, whatever. I'll figure that out eventually. Anyway, it's a very good set, teaching about spiritual warfare and the New World Order and the connection between the two. It's like we're fighting demons. And I'm telling you, we are fighting demons, people. All right. Our warfare is not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces and weaknesses in high places. You know the verse says, Ephesians 6:18 through whatever. You know, one Puritan, William Garnall, started writing that. He's going to write a little sermon on it. He wrote 1,300 pages. It's called The Christian in Complete Armor. Very cool one. Okay, so nobody was listening. Nobody cares. Okay, well, maybe I'll continue. Maybe I won't. I don't know. We'll see. Nobody said nothing. That's kind of a bummer. Okay, good night. Hope somebody out there cares enough to watch this, listen to them. We'll find out as I go. If I don't get any, hey, we really like that, I probably won't read them. And again, I may do them on Patreon only. Good night, everybody. Yeah, Elon Musk. That's pretty cool.